So, good morning, everyone. My name is John Blasco. I am the Deputy Chief of Staff for Congressmember Dan Goldman, based in New York, but today I'm actually in Washington, D.C., with my colleague who I'll pass it over to introduce himself.
Hey folks, my name is Matt Pastor. I work for the congressman in DC, and I actually used to work for the Appropriations Committee. So this is a great way for me to pass all that knowledge on to our local folks who are interested in getting funding either through community project funding or through the normal programmatic appropriations process.
So, with that being said, that means Matt is the expert here. So, we are all in great hands. Thank you all for joining and for your interest here. Basically, just to give you a rundown, Matt is going to go through the appropriations process. Some you'll hear about our community project funding process. We have an application that's out. We'll touch a little bit on the eligibility and answer questions for folks. We're going to try to keep as much time for questions because I'm sure that folks have a lot of questions. So, with that being said, oh, one more thing. If you can just actually, Matt, I will defer to you if you want folks to hold questions till the end or if you want them just to raise their hand while you're speaking.
Yeah, I think probably easiest to hold to the end only because I think people will end up having maybe some similar questions. So plus I can usually move through this pretty quickly. And to your point, I think we will leave the majority of the time here for questions.
Fantastic. So, with that being said, I'm actually going to turn it back over to Matt to get us started.
All right. Hello, folks. I think, at the start, if you have been involved in the appropriations process before, a lot of this information will be known to you. I think this is just an easy way of making sure that we're all on the same page and aware of just the way that the process works. So for way of background, like I said, I used to work for the Appropriations Committee, but I also worked for the Office of Management and Budget in the White House, which does the president's budget on the opposite side of DC. And the important thing to remember here, right, is we have our 12 appropriations bills. These bills have to pass every year. They fund the entire, what we say is the discretionary side of the government. And so this is a great way for us to get priorities for the district included, either through programmatic or language requests, which I'll go into in a second, or community project funding requests, which are a little bit more member driven. So for the programmatic and language requests, you will be able to find that request form on our website. It'll be under services, I believe. If you go to services and FY 2027 appropriations requests, this is how you can put in what we would say is a program request or a language request. So a program request is basically just a specific funding level for a program, right? If you wanted there to be more funding for the National Endowment for the Arts, for example, you could put in a request to say, hey, we would like to request $200 million to go to the National Endowment for the Arts. You can submit that through our form so we can review it and make sure that that gets passed on to the Appropriations Committee as part of our submissions. Or there are language requests. There's two types, report language or bill language. Bill language has the force of law, so it would go into statute if the bill is passed. So it would a lot of times direct agencies to, sometimes it's a funds prohibition, sometimes it's directing a specific amount of funding within a certain title to go to a certain activity, right? So if you were saying, of the money appropriated to the EPA, we would like to set aside this amount for enforcement activities. You can do that in bill language or in the report, which accompanies the appropriations bills. This is basically congressional intent. So it signals to the agencies how we would like money to be spent. A lot of times it will lay out funding tables that set out the Appropriations Committee's, direction to agencies, and it also can include things like reports, like the name suggests. So if you want the agency to do a report on, perhaps on spam calls, right? We can ask the FTC to give us a report on what they have seen and what they've learned, and to report that back to us. So it's a great way of getting things done. And like I said, because these have to pass every year, unlike authorization bills, which don't have to pass every year, these must move, and so these must-pass bills are a great vehicle for that. Now, community project funding, I think, is the thing most folks are interested in. Some will call it, quote, colloquially would call it an earmark. But basically, these are the ways that Congressman Goldman can directly respond to the needs of the district by using specific accounts that the Appropriations Committee has set aside where we can put projects in that is coming directly from us. So I think most of you have probably seen our project guide, which lays this out. But essentially, there are a handful of accounts that the Appropriations Committee has chosen, which the members of Congress can use to pick individual programs to fund. Now, keep in mind here, there is a limit on the amount of money that can go towards community project funding every year. I believe it is half of 1% of all discretionary funding. That is all to say the amount of funding rather that each member gets is sort of capped roughly, because it really is the amount of people who are putting in requests and the number of those requests. And just for awareness, the majority gets more money than the minority. So about 60% of all community project funds go to those folks in the majority, and the minority gets about 40%. So in general, you'll see us getting a smaller slice of that money in the House side. In the Senate, it is a little bit different, and I can get to that in a second, but I will walk through kind of what our process is, and then I can touch on our New York senators as well. So in our project guide, but also on the Appropriations Committee website, you'll be able to see a list of all the eligible accounts for community project funding. A couple things are important to note here, which is, in general, there are a lot of restrictions on nonprofits. A lot of accounts do not let nonprofits apply, and some that do have kind of limited that to sometimes in the case of commerce, justice, science, universities and colleges are the only nonprofits eligible for certain accounts. And then if it's for the Burn JAG account, specifically for nonprofits that have a function that relates sort of to law enforcement, the definition of that is a little bit broad, law enforcement activities, and we can get into that if folks have questions about sort of what that means, because it's set out in statute, so we can kind of make the case there. And in the case of our health accounts, it has to be hospitals, federally qualified health centers, and things like that. But importantly, for the health accounts, there is a broad prohibition on any nonprofits that either provide resources for abortions or gender affirming care, or even refer folks for abortion. So this is a very, very broad prohibition, and it sort of is a problem for us, because if you are perhaps a wing of a hospital and you're focused on cancer treatment, but some of the other parts of the hospital fund abortions, that prohibition would still apply. So for nonprofits, I think it's really important, if you're looking to apply for one of these accounts, just checking in with both the project guide and also with the Appropriations Committee guidance to see if you fall into one of those categories that is acceptable. Now, there is a sort of arrangement that can be set up, and I would say it's important to note here, if a city or state or other government agency, right, in our case is city and state, right, if it's New York City, if a New York City agency is willing to sort of be the fiduciary and administer this grant in partnership with our nonprofit partners, that is possible. But the important thing is the person administering the grant has to be the eligible entity. So to think of one that we did last year, we had the New York City Department of Aging has some mobile vans. They own the titles to those vans. So if those vans are then doing work in conjunction with nonprofits, that is okay. But New York City is the owner of the vans. So that's important to consider. If you're going to try to figure out a way for your nonprofit to get funding, a lot of times it has to be in partnership with a city or state agency that can be in charge of the money and would be the fiduciary. So they have to be the ones administering it. It's not like we can give New York City a check for $1 million and they can turn around and give you that check. They're actually on the hook for making sure that money is responsibly spent and spent in the way that has been laid out in the law. So that is, I think, a little bit of a general primer on where we are as it relates to nonprofits. If you are from a city agency, you're absolutely eligible for everything. Government agencies are absolutely eligible, but I would check just to make sure that the activities that you are hoping to fund are consistent with the activities laid out in the account. In many cases, these are statutorily laid out. As I said, for Burn JAG, if you open the Burn JAG statute, and we don't have to be a lawyer to know it, it'll list, right, it could be for criminal justice education, crime prevention, and it will list those things out. If you have questions about it, absolutely ask us. We will try to be creative to figure out ways that we can figure out accounts to fit, or projects rather, to fit under certain accounts. But I would just say make sure that you're checking that eligibility. And then importantly, the most important part of these projects is the community, right? Community projects. The committee and Congress really wants to see that these projects are broadly supported by the community. And so letters of support are a really important piece of this process. Letters of support can be a lot of different things. It could be a newspaper article saying, hey, that this is a really desperately needed project. It could be letters from state and local officials, which oftentimes it is. We get a lot of letters from, folks in the district who are at different levels of government saying this is an urgently needed project. It could be from other nonprofits in the area talking about the need for this. But the more community support we have, the better. I think you're trying to demonstrate to Congress, hey, the community is behind this. This project has a serious need because this is the gap we're filling. And I think that kind of goes to what the committee calls a federal nexus. And this is a little confusing if you see them saying federal nexus. It just means that there is a compelling federal program that addresses this need. So you're saying that, hey, this is part of, if you're talking about the HUD EDI program, the Economic Development Initiative, that here is this project that we have. It's here to address these specific functions. That's sort of their federal nexus. So don't worry about that too much. I would say leave that to us and we can handle that on our end. And then two more important things. One, all of these grants that are earmarkable under community project funding are actually competitive grants of the same name. So if you are part of an entity that has applied for competitive grants in the past, you can still apply for these competitive grants outside of our process. And I would often encourage you to do so. In the past, I have worked with projects in my former offices that have applied for the competitive grant and have received the earmark, and we have found a way for them to both receive the funding. But basically, when you're going through the process of figuring out these projects to submit to us under certain accounts, you're basically doing all the legwork that you would need to do for those grant applications anyway. And so you should send them in. And absolutely, if you do send them in, let us know. We'll often send in letters of support for those grant requests, and we're happy to do so. We want to make sure that the folks in our district are getting as much money as possible. And then for the senators, so our appropriations deadlines are a little different, and I apologize for the short kind of nature of them. We were given like 3 weeks notice total to get through all of our approach process. The Senate is still a little bit behind us. I believe Senator Schumer's portal for what they call CDS, congressionally directed spending, the acronyms are different. It's the exact same thing, except they have less eligibility restrictions on the Senate side, and they have different accounts that are earmarkable. So I would say if there is a project that you have that you would like to get funded, you can't do it through ours because there are restrictions. Definitely check in with Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand. They might have the ability to fund it. And they also don't have the same restrictions on the number of projects that can be submitted. We can only do 20. They have a larger number. I think it's unlimited on the Senate side that they're allowed to submit. So if you're submitting something to us, feel free to check in with them. Obviously, we check in with our partners across the building in the Senate, but we want to just make sure that everyone is aware of all the opportunities there and are maximizing their chances to get funding. Because, like I said, for us, the most important thing is we are getting as much money for the district as we can. And so I think that is my general primer. You will find our application for community project funding on the website. There's a number of eligibility questions you have to fill out, right? The name of the project, location, website, itemized budget. When we're talking about budgets, it doesn't have to be, a 10-page document. It can just be a bulleted list. If you're requesting $750,000, could just be 8 bullets describing what that breakdown is. We don't need like an enhanced accounting spreadsheet. We kind of just have to see what the money is. And it's important that your project meets the period of availability of the grant in which you're applying. In general, the best way to think about this is, can you spend the money in 1 year? It doesn't have to be the fiscal year because, as we know, for the federal government, you will have the fiscal year ends in September. We'll start the new fiscal year on October 1st. We almost never have the appropriations bills in law by then. This past year, we didn't finish FY26 until January. So we have a little bit of a delay. The important thing is from when you get the money, you have basically 1 year to spend it. So can you spend it in that time? Is the money eligible? And can you give us a breakdown of what's there? Those are the most important things in addition to checking eligibility, because on our end, we have an internal deadline for 6 of the bills tomorrow. I know that's very close, but our deadline to submit them to the committee is next week. So we just want to make sure that we have enough time to review and approve those. And I think with that, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and I've just talked at you for a long period of time. So I will turn it back to John to kind of run the MC of questions.
Great. Thanks, Matt. I will also share to Matt's point earlier, if you are not eligible for one of the committees for our office and you do apply to Senator Schumer or Gillibrand, you can also request a letter of support from our office to go with your application to Senator Schumer and Gillibrand. And what I usually do is I will usually reach out to both of those offices, giving them a heads up that the Congress member is submitting a letter of support for X organization. I also dropped all the links that Matt was referring to. I dropped them in the chat. And I will do so again in case you do not see it or in case you came in late. So that's the House guidance. We have a funding resource guide that has FAQs on it. There's the community project funding application, and then there's the programmatic and language request. For the Q&A portion, I'm going to stop recording because I want folks to feel free to ask any question that they want. But before I do that, Matt has another point.
One more item to flag that I forgot to say, and John mentioned, our project guide has FAQs, but it also has the total amount of funding per account from the last time we did this. So if you are looking at a specific account and you're wondering, hey, I want to request 5 million, is that reasonable? You can go in and we have listed there the total amount of funding, the total requests, and then sort of the median and the mean for that account. So it can give you an idea of right sizing your request and seeing, okay, if the average is 1.7 million for FY26, kind of the ballpark of where we're going to be for FY27. So if you are 4 or 5 times more, it's probably not the right amount to request, or just at least to be sure of what you might get. And if it is larger and you are reaching out to another office in the delegation, right? So if there are shared priorities in Brooklyn or Manhattan and you're reaching out to the Velasquez team or the Nadler team and asking us to work on something together, please flag that for us as well. We obviously can get more money if we're working with our city partners, but usually it will be something that is crossing district lines. Our focus is always going to be things that are physically located in New York 10.
Great. So let me just stop the recording.